The doors to Sterling and Blackwood had always felt like gates to another world, one of untouchable wealth, corruption, and whispered horrors that never quite died. But the deeper Anna moved through its corridors, the more she realized this place wasn't just built on deals and deception. It was built on something darker, something sinister, something that clung to the walls like a shadow that refused to leave. She had long since stopped being surprised by what she overheard. Executives laughed over lavish dinners while hundreds of employees were quietly let go, their jobs erased like they had never existed. Secretaries whispered about funds disappearing, about projects that never saw the light of day, about people who asked the wrong questions and never came back. But there were other whispers too, the kind that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. It had started subtly, the lights flickering in certain rooms where they shouldn't, the temperature dropping in the old boardroom, even when the heat was on full blast. The way mirrors in the executive lounge seemed to warp for just a second, as if something inside them was trying to claw its way out. Anna had dismissed it as paranoia. That was until she heard the voices. Late one evening, when the office was nearly empty, she had lingered near the sealed-off conference room, the one no one spoke about, the one that hadn't been used in decades. She hadn't meant to stop, but something in the silence of the space had called to her. And then she heard it, a voice, soft and distant, like a whisper carried through a long, dark tunnel. Anna? She froze. Her breath caught in her throat, her hands gripping the cleaning cart until her knuckles turned white. She turned, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the hall was empty. The next day, she tried to tell herself she had imagined it, but the deeper she dug, the clearer the pattern became. A former whistleblower, David Langley, had vanished after challenging the board, his resignation email sent from an account that no longer existed. A secretary had mentioned hearing strange noises near the abandoned boardroom before suddenly quitting without notice. The security cameras never worked in certain hallways, especially the one outside that room. And then there was Victor Blackwood, the man who had stolen this company, stolen her father's life, and buried every secret that could expose him. He didn't seem afraid of anything, but Anna had seen it. The way his expression changed when he walked past the sealed door, the way his hands twitched as if resisting the urge to turn and look. He knew something, and Anna was going to make him confess. She started with the archives, carefully slipping into the records room when no one was watching. Most documents were digital now, but old paper files still held secrets that Blackwood's algorithms couldn't erase. And in a locked drawer, buried beneath years of acquisitions and forged contracts, she found it. Her father's last meeting transcript. It was dated the night he disappeared, the last time he had ever been seen alive, and scrawled across the bottom in handwriting that wasn't his were 3 chilling words. It's not over. That night the voices came again. This time she didn't run. This time she listened, and as the flickering light dimmed into darkness, she whispered back, I know. The reckoning had begun. Anna moved through the grand halls of Sterling and Blackwood like a ghost, unseen and unacknowledged. The skyscraper, a beacon of wealth and power in New York, gleamed under the morning sun, yet inside it reeked of something rotten. Greed, arrogance, and secrets buried beneath polished floors. Anna had long learned to keep her presence muted. Dressed in her plain uniform, pushing her cart, she was nothing more than an afterthought to the executives who strutted past her, their designer suits and smug conversations filling the air. They barely noticed her when they made their backhanded remarks, laughing over coffee about who would be cut next in their relentless quest for profit. They certainly didn't notice when Victor Blackwood, the company's feared CEO, strode into the lobby with his usual air of superiority. His sharp voice sent interns scrambling and executives stiffening. I want the quarterly reports on my desk by noon and tell legal to shut down that whistleblower nonsense. He barked to his assistant. To him, people were tools, disposable, replaceable. But Anna saw. Anna always saw. She had spent years watching, listening, remembering every face, every betrayal, every crime masked as business strategy. They thought she was invisible, just another cleaner. But the truth? She was the only one who saw everything. The way bonuses mysteriously disappeared from paychecks. The way certain employees who knew too much suddenly found themselves fired, or worse, gone without a trace. The whispers of something dark in the company's past, of a founder who had vanished. Anna moved methodically, her hands steady as she wiped down desks where multi-million-dollar deals were signed with shady handshakes. She had overheard too much, but she had never let them see her react. The boardroom, where real power lurked, was an untouchable fortress. Or so they thought. Today was different. As Anna pushed her cart into the elevator, her eyes flickered to the sealed-off top-floor conference room, the one no one entered. The one where the company's founder, her father, had vanished decades ago. The executives of Sterling and Blackwood were too busy basking in their own self-importance to see what was coming. Anna wasn't just here to clean. She was here to bury them. The moment Anna found her father's last recorded words, something shifted inside her. It's not over. The ink was old, the edges of the paper slightly crumpled, but the words felt fresh, alive, as if warning her across time. A shiver crawled down her spine. For years she had walked these halls, moving unnoticed, a shadow among shadows, gathering scraps of truth. But now she had proof, not just of fraud or corporate corruption, but of something far worse. Her father, Jonathan Whitmore, wasn't just an investor in Sterling and Blackwood. He had founded it, built it from nothing, until Victor Blackwood and his board had stolen it from him. And when he had fought back, when he had threatened to expose them, he had simply disappeared. Anna had spent her entire life believing the official story, that her father had died in an accident, that it was a tragedy, an unfortunate loss. But the paper in her trembling hands told a different story, one that Victor Blackwood had fought to bury. And yet, something even deeper, something more unnatural was rising in the cracks of her carefully constructed revenge. The building itself remembered. That night, she stayed late. Not because she wanted to, but because the voice returned. She had been passing by the sealed boardroom when the air around her turned dense, suffocating, like she had stepped into a space that didn't belong to the present. The lights overhead flickered violently, shadows stretching long and jagged across the floor. Then came the sound, a slow, deliberate knocking, not from the outside, from within the sealed room. Anna's pulse roared in her ears. The door had been locked for years. No one was supposed to be in there. But someone was. Or something. She reached for the brass handle, her fingers hesitant. She should walk away. She should pretend she had heard nothing, like every other employee who had stood here before her, and ignored the weight of something watching them. But she couldn't. The door swung open on its own. Inside, the boardroom was frozen in time. The long polished table, the high-backed chairs, the untouched air of something unfinished. But there was one thing that shouldn't have been there. A single chair turned toward the far window. It was facing away from her as if someone had been sitting in it, staring at the city skyline. And then, slowly, it began to turn. Anna's breath caught in her throat. The chair was empty, but the moment she stepped inside, she knew she wasn't alone. The lights snapped off, the shadows moved. And then she heard it, a whisper right behind her ear. "You finally came back." Anna spun around, her heartbeat slamming into her ribs. There was no one there, but she could feel it, the presence lingering in the air, pressing against her skin like cold fingertips. She forced herself to steady. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't imagining this. The ghosts of Sterling and Blackwood were real, and one of them was her father. Anna didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence she had stolen, documents spread out in a chaotic spiral. She needed to know the truth, not just the corporate betrayal, but what had really happened to her father that night. She sifted through old financial reports, emails, board meeting minutes, and there it was. the final clue she had been searching for. Her father hadn't just threatened to expose Victor Blackwood. He had called for a vote to remove him as CEO, and the meeting had been scheduled in the very same boardroom where she had heard the voice. Anna swallowed hard. That night, her father had walked into the room, fully prepared to take back what was his. But he had never walked out. And now she was about to finish what he started. Her plan was already in motion. She had gathered enough evidence to force a shareholder vote to challenge Victor the way her father once had. But this time, she wouldn't be alone. This time, the past was fighting with her. Outside, the wind howled against the windows of her apartment, rattling the glass like something trying to break through. She exhaled slowly, steeling herself. "Tomorrow," she whispered, staring at the city skyline. "I walk into that boardroom, and I don't walk out until Victor Blackwood falls." Somewhere in the distance, a faint knocking echoed against the wind. She didn't flinch this time. She simply smiled, because she knew. She wasn't the only one waiting. The day had finally arrived. Anna stood before the towering Sterling and Blackwood building, staring up at its gleaming facade, a monument to greed, corruption, and stolen power. This was where it had all begun, and this was where it would all end. The annual shareholders' meeting was already underway on the top floor, in the very same sealed boardroom where her father had last stood, where his fate had been sealed, where something in the walls, in the very foundation of the company, remembered what had been done to him. Anna inhaled deeply, steeling herself. She wasn't just walking into a business confrontation. She was walking into war. As she entered the lobby, employees bustled around, unaware of the reckoning that loomed. The receptionist barely glanced up. Why would they? To them, she was still just a cleaning lady, a ghost, a shadow, someone beneath their notice. But by the end of today, they would all see her. Inside the lion's den. The boardroom doors loomed ahead. Anna pushed them open, stepping into the battlefield. Seated around the long, polished table were the executives, board members, and shareholders, the supposed untouchables of the corporate world. They sipped their imported coffee, exchanged smug glances, and discussed profits earned through the suffering of their employees. At the head of the table, Victor Blackwood reclined in his chair, exuding arrogance, his very presence a reminder that he had never lost a battle in his life. Until today. His gaze flickered to her, and then dismissal, just like always. "You're in the wrong room," Victor said smoothly, his tone filled with casual contempt. A few executives chuckled under their breath, barely masking their amusement. Anna didn't react. She stepped forward, reached into her bag, and slammed a thick folder onto the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "Actually," she said, her voice calm, controlled. "Deadly. I'm exactly where I need to be." Victor's smirk faltered. The other board members glanced at each other, frowning. Confusion, annoyance, mild irritation. She could almost hear their thoughts. Who does she think she is? How dare she interrupt? Anna didn't care. She had spent years being ignored, dismissed, treated as nothing, and now she held all the power. Slowly, deliberately, she opened the folder. Inside was everything: financial fraud, embezzlement, illegal terminations, insider trading, and evidence linking Victor Blackwood to the disappearance of Jonathan Whitmore. Murmurs erupted around the table. The amusement evaporated. Victor's jaw clenched. "This is nonsense," he said sharply, his voice no longer amused but threatened. Anna tilted her head slightly as if considering his words before reaching into the folder again and pulling out the final piece of evidence. A vote proposal. A motion to remove Victor Blackwood as CEO effective immediately. Silence. The board members stared at the document, their faces shifting between shock, disbelief, and, most importantly, fear. Anna placed her hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. "I know what you did," she said, her voice like ice. "I know what you did to my father." A collective intake of breath. Victor's knuckles went white against the armrest of his chair. Your father was murdered, Anna finished for him. The temperature in the room dropped. The lights flickered. Anna did not blink. She saw the way some of the older board members paled, the way their eyes darted toward the sealed door at the far end of the room. The one no one ever spoke about. The room where Jonathan Whitmore had disappeared. The room where he still remained. Victor opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, the boardroom door slammed shut on its own. A few members jumped in their seats, looking around nervously. A low, barely audible whisper drifted through the air. It's not over. Panic. Anna saw it. The fear creeping into their eyes, the realization that something unnatural was happening. Victor forced a laugh, trying to mask the unease creeping up his spine. This is ridiculous. You're trying to intimidate me with... What? Ghost stories? Anna only smiled. A chair suddenly scraped back on its own. One of the board members gasped, looking at the empty seat beside him. Another whisper. You finally came back. The table shook. The temperature plummeted. Victor shot up from his chair, slamming his fists against the table. Enough! His voice boomed, but it was frantic, desperate. Anna did not move. She simply reached into her bag one last time and pulled out a tape recorder. She pressed play. The room filled with a familiar voice. Victor's own, recorded from a conversation years ago. If Whitmore doesn't back down, we'll make sure he does. He won't be around much longer anyway. The room went deathly silent. Victor staggered back, his face pale. Anna leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not... The boardroom was in chaos. The cold air clung to the executives like unseen hands, squeezing their lungs, making it harder to breathe. Papers scattered across the table. The shattered glass reflected their horrified expressions. Victor Blackwood, once the untouchable CEO, stood frozen, his face drained of all color. He stared at the empty doorway, but everyone in the room could feel it. They were not alone. But Anna? She stood strong. This was the moment she had waited for. Years of injustice, of silent suffering, of being treated like nothing had led to this. And now, as the very walls of Sterling and Blackwood seemed to tremble, she held all the power. But power alone wasn't enough. Anna wasn't here to simply destroy. She was here to restore. With calm, deliberate movements, she walked to the head of the table, Victor's seat. She placed her hands on its polished surface and looked each board member in the eye. The terror in the room was palpable. Some of them had been complicit. Some had merely stood by in silence, too afraid to challenge the corruption. No more. With a voice that cut through the fear like a blade, Anna spoke. This is what happens when you build power on lies, on greed, on stolen lives. Her voice was not raised, yet it carried a weight that commanded the room. This company was never yours, Victor. You took it. You murdered for it. And now, everything you built on that betrayal is crumbling. Victor's lips parted, his arrogance cracked beyond repair. He knew, everyone in the room knew, that this was the end for him. But then came the moment that shifted everything. Victor fell to his knees. His breaths came in short, ragged gasps as he gripped his chest, his face twisting in pain. Sweat pooled on his forehead, his body trembling violently. The once invincible CEO, the man who ruled through contempt and cruelty, was falling apart before their eyes. Anna's jaw tightened. This was justice, wasn't it? For years she had dreamed of this moment, of watching Victor Blackwood suffer as he had made others suffer, of seeing him broken, powerless, afraid. But as she looked at him, gasping for air, drowning in his own sins, something inside her shifted. Because she wasn't like him. She had spent her life watching people like Victor trample over the weak, using power to destroy, to control, to dominate. But power could also be something else. It could be a force of change, a force of compassion, of justice, not vengeance. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then she reached for her phone. Everyone in the room watched in disbelief as she dialed emergency services. "This is Anna Whitmore," she said, her voice clear, unwavering. "I need an ambulance at Sterling and Blackwood, now!" Victor's eyes snapped to hers, disbelief flickering beneath his pain. "You," he rasped. His lips barely formed the words. "Why?" Anna met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Because power doesn't mean letting people die," she said simply. "That's the difference between you and me." The weight of her words hung in the air, pressing down on the guilty souls in that room. Some of them lowered their heads in shame. Others looked at her with newfound respect. And then, the moment that changed everything. One of the younger board members, a man who had always stayed silent in meetings, too afraid to challenge Victor's rule, stood up. "I second the motion," he said. Anna turned to him, surprised. He lifted the vote proposal she had placed on the table. "I second the motion to remove Victor Blackwood as CEO, effective immediately." A ripple passed through the room. One by one, others followed. "I third the motion." "I fourth." "I fifth." Until all of them had spoken. Anna had done it. Not through fear, not through vengeance, but through strength, through integrity, through the power of choosing something greater than revenge. By the time the paramedics arrived, Victor Blackwood was no longer the CEO of Sterling and Blackwood. Anna was, and she would never rule like him. As she stepped out into the corridor, she paused by the sealed boardroom door. The air was still, peaceful. For the first time in decades, Sterling and Blackwood was free of its ghosts. And so was she. Anna stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling and Blackwood, overlooking the New York skyline. The sun had begun to set, casting an orange glow over the city, a symbol of endings and new beginnings. Behind her, the once feared Victor Blackwood had been removed, his reign of terror over. The boardroom no longer echoed with his contemptuous laughter, no longer reeked of fear and corruption. It was over, or so she thought. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. She turned to see Daniel Whitmore, one of the youngest board members, the first man to stand up and second the motion against Victor. He looked pale, uneasy. "There's something you should see," he said. Anna followed him down the hallway, past the now-abandoned CEO's office, past the workers who cast her glances filled with respect, awe, and perhaps a little fear. She was no longer invisible. He led her to the archived records room, the same room where she had uncovered her father's last meeting transcript. But this time, there was a file she had never seen before, its pages yellowed with age. "What is this?" Anna asked, frowning as she flipped through it. Daniel swallowed. "A document, hidden under layers of old reports." He hesitated before adding, "It's about you." Anna's blood ran cold. She scanned the file, her fingers trembling as she read the words. Jonathan Whitmore's final act, an attempt to transfer company ownership to his heir before his disappearance. Her breath hitched. The document, signed but never processed, proved that Sterling and Blackwood had been meant to be hers all along, not stolen, not inherited. Heron, her father, had tried to protect her. He had tried to secure her future, but Victor had destroyed the evidence. Or so he had thought. Anna's hands curled into fists. Even after his removal, Victor Blackwood's deception still ran deep. But now she had everything. A slow, determined smile curved her lips. "Get the legal team," she said, her voice steady, powerful. "We're taking back everything." And as she walked away, the air shifted, lighter, freer. For the first time in decades, Sterling and Blackwood was finally under the right name. Heron. Anna's story is more than just a tale of revenge or corporate takeover. It is a testament to resilience, patience, and the true nature of power. Too often, people in positions of authority believe that wealth and status make them invincible, that those beneath them are insignificant. But the truth is, power is not about titles or dominance. It is about who is willing to endure, who is willing to fight for justice, and who understands that true leadership comes from integrity, not fear. One of the most powerful lessons from Anna's journey is that being underestimated can be an advantage. For years, she was invisible, just a cleaning lady in the eyes of the corporate elite. But she used that invisibility to observe, learn, and prepare. She didn't act out of emotion or recklessness. She planned strategically, waited for the right moment, and when she finally struck, it was with undeniable force. Another critical takeaway is that revenge is not the ultimate goal. Justice is. When she had the chance to let Victor Blackwood fall completely, to watch him suffer as he had made others suffer, she chose to be better. She chose compassion over cruelty, showing that true strength lies in doing what is right, even when no one expects it. Finally, Anna's story highlights that the truth will always surface. No matter how deeply corruption is buried, how much power is abused, or how many people try to cover up their misdeeds, justice has a way of prevailing. It may take years, it may take patience, but in the end, those who build their success on lies and exploitation will fall, while those who lead with honor and purpose will rise. In life, it's not about how much power you have, it's about how you use it.